I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and for this month's Patreon special, we are going to dye yarn cakes, aka pre-wound balls of yarn, and dyeing them gives this cool, variegated, asymmetric kind of colorway. And we're going to make these yarn cakes out of two different but very similar yarn bases. We have Wool of the Andes worsted weight yarn and Wool of the Andes Superwash worsted weight yarn. Both of these skeins are Peruvian Highland wool, 100% Peruvian Highland wool. It's just one is superwash and the other is not. If you want to learn more about the tools and equipment that I'm using for this video, I will have KnitPicks affiliate links and some Amazon affiliate links down in the video description. I am winding the yarn into cakes by winding it twice. The first time the skein is going on a niddy noddy and I'm winding it here on my ball winder. But then once I finish that, usually it's a little bit tight, so I'll take the yarn from that ball winder and then wind it a second time, giving us a much fluffier, looser yarn cake. And this will allow more dye to go towards the center of the yarn cake than otherwise we might see. A long time ago, I did one of these videos with a hand wound ball of yarn, which gave a super cool effect, but it's way faster to use this ball winder. And so that's what I'm doing here today. While I'm finishing up winding these yarn cakes, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to all of the ChemKnits patrons, including Karen Siegel, Jessica Parco, Michelle Martin, Tamaris Vanas, Don Jans, and the rest of the Fiber patrons whose names you see on the screen right now. Patreon is a really great platform that helps support the content you see here, and if you'd like to learn more about it, go over to patreon.com/ChemKnits. However, subscribing and turning on your notifications here on YouTube is the biggest way you can help support the content, but I want to give a huge thank you to the ChemKnits patrons for their additional support. Popping back in time a little bit, here's our superwash ball that I've wound twice and the non-superwash that's only been wound once. This is a lot fluffier and softer. This is a lot denser. And so winding it the second time just makes things lighter and fluffier and makes it a little bit easier for the dye to go through. If the ball was tight like this, we would have a lot more dye on the outside than the inside. I've done that side-by-side comparison in the past. And now that they've both been wound twice, the sizes are much more comparable. They're both way squishier. And so now let's go take a look and start mixing some dyes that we want to use. I will be dyeing the yarn in two separate pots because our superwash yarn is going to absorb dye faster. But we're going to try to do like an eclectic mix of colors, so we'll be surprised by the colors we see in the end. I have poured out some colors. These are all 1% stock solutions of Dharma acid dyes. We've got some deep magenta, fawn, pecan brown, midnight blue, emerald green, and some royal purple. All of these stocks are on the older side, but I poured them into cups because that way I can use syringes to pull out the colors so we can pull out the exact same amount of dye for each of our cakes. Okay, I have a bunch of graduated syringes over here, and I started with 1/3 cup of water in each of these containers so that way we can kind of tell what our color is doing. But let's start with about 5 milliliters of Fawn in each. I don't know how, oh no. I flung a little bit of dye. It all ended up on the tablecloth, not on my shirt or anything. Okay, let's do just 2 milliliters of pecan brown in each color. And let's bring in some pinks. Let's do, using this bulb syringe, we're also going to do 2 milliliters in each. Okay, so we've got maybe 9 total, not very much yet. We can always start to go bigger should we need to, and I can add more liquid to some of these containers. Let's go ahead and do 10 of our emerald green because this is a color I know takes a long time to strike. And so this combined with basically any of these other colors will give us breaking. Okay, we've got 10 milliliters. We could have made one mixture and divided it into two, but I feel like that this works. Let's go ahead and do 5 of our royal purple. I mix royal purple and emerald green a lot to mix, but usually I use a lot more of the purple than the green. But we're bringing in all these other hues today. So far, the dye in here is looking fairly green to me. And let's do about 5 of our midnight blue. And I'm super curious as to what color these are yet, because we could still add more dye if we want. Okay, we are in that neutral sort of navy greenish category. I think that the green and these two purples is dominating for sure. Let's go ahead and add some more of our brown, just so that way maybe things are different. Here's an additional 3 milliliters. Okay, so if we did, I'm gonna roughly total between these three, we've got 20, 30, 32 milliliters of dye. You know what? Let's start there, and if the color on the outside of the cake doesn't get very dark, we can always add more color. I'm debating. You know what? Let's add more of this deep magenta. We'll add another 2 milliliters to each. So we're up to like 34. And I think these are our mixes. As for the rest of the dye here, these will be used in a leave no dye behind video. I don't think we're going to be able to view everything perfectly side by side, but we're going to try, because I want to try to keep things as similar as possible. So in each of these two pots, I have 16 cups of water, and I'm going to add 4, 5, 6 tablespoons of white vinegar to each of the pots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this vinegar is 5% acetic acid. I want the dye baths to be warm before we add our yarn, but we can add our dyes now. And since I just turned the heat on, I know the dye baths aren't warm yet. We've got sort of a lovely purpley-y tone. I'm going to rinse this out. If the dye baths were warm, I wouldn't be able to rinse the cup directly in the water. They would melt. Okay. Now, the dye pots are not the same size. This is a 12-quart pot. This is an 8-quart pot. But I do have the 12-quart pot on a bigger burner. It's just, things aren't going to be identical. We're just going for it and trying to keep things as similar as possible. But one reason why I think I want to set it up and add the yarn to both pots at the same time is that I'm curious if one will sink in longer, or I'm curious if one will sink in faster than the other, because I know that the non-superwash yarn will likely sink in slowly, just from some other experiences with Wool of the Andes recently, and I think that our superwash yarn will sink in faster. That's my hypothesis. But anyway, I'll be back in a little bit once things are warmer. We are boiling, reducing the heat to low. Funny, from this angle, it almost looks like that's partly clear, but I promise it is not. Okay, here I have my superwash cake, my non-superwash cake, and, well, in we go. Okay, so the superwash one sunk in immediately. Oh my gosh, that was so fast. And we do see some color differences. Look, it's getting pinker as it's soaking that up. Now, our non-superwash cake is soaking up the liquid. It's just not nearly as fast as the Superwash. But I'm gonna pop it over. Hopefully the water level is deep enough. And you can see some bubbles. I don't think that's because I turned it up. I mean, maybe it is. I guess I didn't check the water level. As much as I don't want to touch, I also want to know. Okay, the water level goes down to there. Are we on the bottom? Not quite. Okay, I'm giving the Non-Superwash a little bit of aid here just because I want it to be. But look at how fast it soaked up water. This is way faster, and I think why I expected that it would be able to soak up water with my snow dyeing fail. But I think another reason why this worked here is that the water's hot. And so I think that things just happened faster. So I'm also going to poke this one down a little bit. But I will say I see elements of pink and green in there. But for now, goodness. I mean, poking it did change a little bit what's on the surface. Oof, this one is a lot more green, a lot less pink. I'm going to set a timer for 30 minutes before like I go and I press things like really big. But let me zoom in on each of them. Here's our Superwash cake, and I promise there's tons of color around the outside. But you can see here towards the center, we see a pink surrounded by a little bit of green and then more purple. There was more of that pink when it just sunk in before I moved it around a little bit. And our Non-Superwash cake over here has a lot of green on the surface. I'm not seeing pinks. And so that is something that is surprising me a little bit. I'm a little concerned because this one isn't floating and the other one is. So, okay, here's what we're gonna do. I'm going to increase the water level of both. So right here, I have 4 cups of water with 2 tablespoons of white vinegar to help that guy float. Of course, the water is cold, but I'm gonna do the same thing over here, which sort of tips and moves the cake a little bit. I love that it's like leaning in one direction. That's interesting. But now at least this cake is floating. And the reason why I care about that is because if this cake was sitting on the bottom, then the dye wouldn't be able to access the bottom in the same way, and that would just alter some of the differences we may or may not see. Certainly though, right now, I think a lot more color has absorbed over here than here, but that is consistent with, I guess, the type of yarn having Superwash and Non-Superwash. So anyway, I'll be back in about 30 minutes and we'll see where we are. We're only about 10 minutes into our timer, but I have some thoughts because our Superwash has a lot more color on it overall, and at least from what we can see, our Non-Superwash has less. But the reason why I'm coming back is that there's an important variable that I didn't consider. Our Superwash yarn soaked in the water really, really, really fast. Our Non-Superwash didn't, which adds more resist. And that more resist may mean that we have more white on the inside, which was not something I had considered. But I also need to remind myself that what we see happening here, sort of like on the surface, is not what's necessarily happening within the yarn. And so we aren't opening up any of these layers. I'm just making sure we're still floating. We're not opening up any of these layers to see how much is on the inside. I do wonder how much dye on the inside of a yarn cake comes from the initial, like when it goes in, versus how much will move in and through it throughout the whole process. That I don't know. But anyway, I'll be back in 20 minutes, but I guess, oh, I mean, that doesn't look like there's that much color there. Or here. Huh. But I see a lot of pigment, so who knows? I'm waiting. I'm being patient. I promise. Okay, the water is mostly clear for our Non-Superwash yarn. And I see a lot of color has like moved over the top at least. We have green there. As for our Non-Superwash yarn, It's interesting. It's greenish, but I'm seeing it feels like there's more pigment here, which may or may not be accurate. The reason why it might look like there's more pigment in there is that the depth of the water is greater, and so therefore you're looking through more liquid and more dye as you're looking towards the bottom. But also, it's possible, well, yeah, I mean, I think it's also possible that if more of the dyes are striking to the outside, then things could just be happening slower overall. So, but either way, I'd say we're making progress. Okay, let's add 1, 2, 3, 4 tablespoons of vinegar here. 1, 2, 3, 4 there. And I knew that I said what I was going to do at this stage was just give it a good press. And I guess that's what we're going to do. Oh dear. But we do want to be careful. We don't want the cake to fall apart or anything like that. We don't want to create an annoying tangle. So just quickly pressing that down, letting it come back up. All right. Yeah, I guess we'll wait another, goodness, 30 minutes, at which point I'll probably come and turn off the heat, but I'll see you in a little bit. Just kidding, here I am. You know, sometimes I set things up side by side because I expect there to be a difference. Like today, I expected to see a difference. And we have seen differences. The superwash yarn sunk in faster than the non-superwash. Now, is this a big conclusion I can make? Maybe not. There could be a difference in the density of the two yarn cakes. So it's worth potentially doing a superwash versus non-superwash with dry yarn, seeing if the uncaked dry yarn sinks in faster. But I expect we should see color differences. What I don't remember is if when I did superwash versus non-superwash in the past, if I had both in the same pot. And if that's the case, one of them absolutely will absorb more color because superwash tends to absorb faster. So I don't know. I just know that this is fun and I love doing side-by-side comparisons like this. So if there's any superwash versus non-superwash kinds of things you'd like me to play with, please let me know down in the comments below. But ultimately, the point I came in front of the camera to make is that even if I expect there to be a difference and we don't see a big difference from the two, that negative result, null result, is something that we've learned as well. And so then we would be able to make the conclusion that maybe it doesn't make as big of a difference as I thought. Of course, we don't know yet. I have to be patient. Patience can be hard, but I'm very excited to be doing this project. So I hope you're enjoying it. Most of the color has absorbed in both kettles, but I'm now going to turn off the heat. And I think I'm going to leave the yarn in here to cool off for a little while. I may change my mind after a bit, but I think I'll leave it in here for at least 30 minutes, maybe a couple of hours to just cool, and then I'll think about removing them. As for why I'm doing this, eventually I might use these pots to dye some other yarn today, but until I'm ready to start doing that, then I may as well leave the yarn in here. But sometimes my decision to leave something in the pot to cool versus remove it has more of a reason, and other times it's just based on logistics, like today. After about an hour of cooling, the water is looking pretty clear, which is great. Trying to drain out some of this water. I want to let our yarn cool completely. This is our non-superwash. Oh, it's not that warm. I guess it's cold enough that the yarn is like very handleable. Now, this is our superwash. Okay, and interesting, squeezing that made the water slightly pink. Okay, I'm gonna want to let them cool more before we wash it. I would say that our superwash feels a lot more green overall. We have a lot of pigment on the outside. And let's peek. Okay, on the inside we have sort of a pastel, but we definitely have color towards the inside. Ooh, maybe there's some pink notes in there. All right, let's check here. And on the inside we have a brighter green. I think that the inside color here is more pigmented maybe than what we have here, but it's definitely different. What if I go even further? It's about the same. Okay, we'll see when we unravel. I mean, certainly, I don't know if we can say much about the depth of the color, per se, but certainly the way that the different pigments struck and the color on just the outside is really different. So that's really, really cool. But anyway, I'm gonna let this finish cooling off until it's completely room temperature, and then we will rinse it before letting these dry for a bit. Ooh, let's look at the reverse side though. Similar. Lots of color on the bottom. Ooh. Okay, our non-superwash. And our superwash, which has like pinks down there. That pink we saw at the beginning. Interesting. The reason why we're seeing different colors is because different pigments strike at different rates. And it's possible that something with the fiber differences here changed the rates of some things, so we get more green and more pink, depending on the fiber content. But anyway, I'll see you when it's time for our first initial wash. Now that it's dark out, it's amazing how the tones in these feel quite different. Now, we're not doing a full wash with soap right now, mainly because we can't really access all of the yarn, but I'm adding our yarn into a rinse bath, squeezing it, letting it sort of soak up the clean water, mainly because I'm curious if there would be bleeding, and it doesn't look like there's any. I do need to remember one of these is non-superwash. Okay, I'm going to fill the basin up with water one more time. We'll rinse the yarn and put it through the spin dryer. So this is allowing us to both remove the acid, and I mean, it doesn't look like there's any bleeding, which is a good sign. Awesome. All right, I'm going to take this cake, gently squeeze out the water, and then I'm going to carefully put this in the spin dryer to try to remove as much of the liquid as possible. But oh, look at those colors. And the big reason for using the spin dryer is that, that water is cold, is that I'm going to want to leave this for a few days so it can dry a bit before we try to unravel it. And oh my gosh, so pretty. And so using the spin dryer to remove some of the water in here will just help things. But oof. Ooh. All right, I'll see you in a couple days. It's been a couple of days, and I think the cakes are probably mostly dry. There might be, no, that feels dry in the center. Now, what's funny is I don't know if I could tell you with certainty which one is superwash and which one is non without going back and reviewing the footage, but I do know I marked the superwash, and I think, editing Rebecca will let me know if I'm wrong, I think that this is our superwash. It's overall paler on the inside because oh wait, no, I think this is our superwash. Actually, this is way paler. This one is our superwash. I think this one's our non-superwash. But yeah, I'm gonna go unravel these onto a Nitty Naughty so we can compare them more. But hey, I think I figured it out, but I might still be wrong, so editing Rebecca will let you know how wrong I am. And here is the yarn all unraveled, where we can kind of visualize the gradients a bit. They look so different. Here's our superwash yarn, and I mean, we've said this already, but I think on camera right now it's looking a little bit more neutral or tan. I do really feel some pink notes in here. And on our non-superwash, it feels more green. So I think that the big differentiator between the two, because if you look at the deeper colors, those seem to spread in a very similar way. I think that the green is striking much faster on our superwash yarn, which is giving those big hue differences, because we did mix so many different colors together here today. As for the balance and where the deeper color transitions into the lighter color, it's hard to say how similar or different things are between the two because, well, I mean, the colors are so different and you wouldn't really know until you knit it up. But I just think that it's amusing that we have a big difference here between a superwash and non-superwash version of the same yarn base, but it isn't in the way that I anticipated. I expected with our superwash yarn base on the left to see so much more white, and we didn't. We just got less green towards the end, less of that pastel green. And so, anyway, I think it's pretty fun. One other feature I want to point out on both is that we do have some, what I like to call reverse speckling, because of where the yarn sort of crosses over another strand, adding a little resist, and it gives some flecks of light color on the dark background. And that's just something I adore. Sometimes when I do a yarn cake dyeing project, it can feel like there's two different colorways. One that's really deep and then maybe one that is the rest. And these ones feel like there's balance. I like that we have some of the deepest color all the way through on both, making them a fun sort of variegated, gradient, asymmetric kind of colorway. Here's the thing about experiments. Sometimes even if you think you know the result, it's worth doing it because you might get a result that you didn't expect. And that might be because there's a variable that you didn't account for, such as how quickly the yarn soaks into the dye bath, which may or may not have made a difference here today, but then we get results that are different. And really, the biggest difference between our yarn bases, which likely accounted for every single other variable difference, is that one of these yarn bases is superwash and one isn't. And so just because you think you know that it's going to be different doesn't mean it's not worth trying, because sometimes, and with some colors, the results might be really, really similar and subtle, and other times the differences might be more extreme. But this is also why sometimes when you dye yarn on one colorway and you get a particular result, and then you try to do the exact same technique on a different yarn base, things may turn out differently, and sometimes you don't know exactly why, and it can be surprising, or things could break a different way. And so you always do need to consider that yarn base as a reason why your recipe or your technique didn't turn out quite the way you expected. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I really hope you've enjoyed this video. I have a few more superwash versus non-superwash videos that are actually in progress, although depending on the order that the videos are released, you may or may not have seen those already. But either way, you should subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I love to play with color and yarn and explore different ways or ways I've tried before but I'm doing different colors on, and just having fun with color and yarn. I post videos at least twice a week, and you don't want to miss any of it. And so the biggest thing you can do to help support the content here is subscribing and engaging with the videos. But if you want to support the content on another level, you can go and check out the ChemKnits Patreon. You can find more information at patreon.com/ChemKnits. Thank you so much for watching.